moved from there to Gambela, from Gambela to Addis, where I graduated in 2012. I participated in advocating for refugees who were in Ethiopia to be included in the referendum and as well in the election of 2010, in which I happened to be one of the people who were the members of the organizing committee for South Sudan Referendum Commission in Addis Ababa, in which we have done a lot. As a station of Ethiopia, we achieved 99% of secession from the north because we are the very victim and we know what is it to be marginalized. Unless those who were in South Sudan, some of them votes for unity, but we know what does it mean to be marginalized. And then hoping that there will be peace in my country, I moved back, in which I would thank African Union, IGAD and the Troika countries for helping us for the first time witness what we should call independent. But as South Sudan as a country is independent but not free. We are independent, but we are not free, as I'm talking to you. When I moved back in 2012, in 2013, happened the conflict again. That it started as a political struggle within the SPLM party and took tribal lines. And people were targeted door to door, in which I appreciate African Union, Security Council for sending commission to South Sudan to go and investigate atrocities that were committed during that conflict, in which I'm not pointing fingers at anyone, but by both sides, as the say goes always. And then you would be subjected to die at any time. And it's still the gunshot, as I told you, was the music we danced to. To me now, if you shoot guns here, I'll not be shocked, because that's the music I listened to always from the time I was a kid until today. And in 2013, I came to Uganda as a refugee again. I stayed here in Kampala, in which I have to appreciate the commissioner. In his office was the time I went and seek refugee asylum. I applied for political asylum, but I didn't achieve it. I got a refugee asylum. And then there were no support by then. My mom, as a person who took care of us for a long time, being frustrated and stressed, she's now diabetic, and she has hypertension. And there's no one also was helping us until this time. She's still in Uganda in refugee camp, and no help. And my own brother was on all those conditions, is now suffering from schizophrenia. One of the disease also many people are suffering from in Africa and also in the whole world. But people are being helped, but I don't know why we don't get help always. And in 2016, hoping that there will be peace, when peace was signed in 2015, I went back to South Sudan. Again, displaced in July 2016, when I found myself in the POC, the people I'm representing now as IDPs. We have suffered a lot, and as a person standing before you today, I've suffered a lot. But one thing I have picked from there is whenever there's a beginning for something, there must be a end. And I didn't took that suffering to be weakness to me, but rather than transform it to be strength. And that's where you can see me here today. You can't imagine, I cannot describe the suffering I've gone through. And now many people are displaced. 4.3, 1.8 IDPs, and 2.3 are now in foreign countries as refugees. And I thank Uganda for hosting a huge number of our people, my fellow brothers and sisters who are now in Uganda. And I thank Uganda so much, and it's not the first time that Uganda hosts us. They help us in our war in independence. And they are still helping us until today. And I must register my gratitude to the government of Uganda under President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, that we are very grateful to Uganda. And may God bless you, and may God bless Uganda. So now we have many challenges that we face in the POC, as Our Excellency the Usain Boyce told you before. When she came to South Sudan in POC 3, in the POC we are locked in our own world. No one come to us. ranging from education that is being given. You member states offer opportunity for scholarships for South Sudanese, yet IDPs are not given chance. And why you don't check where the scholarships are heading? We have idle and frustrated youth in the POC, in which I am one among those youth. We have talented people, a potential that is not tapped. And if there's no education, what a future for the people in the POC? The food that we receive is very small. It was cut from 15 kilogram for a 30 day to 10. And how would person eat only 10 kilogram for 30 days? Imagine how we are suffering in South Sudan. Water shortage in the POCs. Lack of employment in the POC. And that's where now you would hear everywhere POCs are now ripe of crimes because of idle and frustrated youth in the POC. And I used to advocate all this. What is peace when the crime rate will be rising in South Sudan? Because tomorrow when there's peace in South Sudan and people have no skills to help themselves, those youths will resort to gang themselves up and make sure that they rob and do crimes to survive. And what is peace if the crime rate will be rising? And people are giving blind eye to all these things. We are now breeding criminals in the POC that we would have transformed to be useful to the community and the society and to Africa. You always hold meetings, conference like this, and IDPs were left out. And that's why I'm very grateful to UNHCR to nominate someone for this for the first time, in which I am one of the occasion today. We are very grateful to UNHCR. And I would take it as a privilege to also thank UNHCR, because it was the only mother and the father I had for the whole of my life. And they are the first people now to pick me up, to get connected to some of you that I've gotten friends from you now today, in which I have chance also to meet the youth in Boy. Maybe we will support her to also transform African youth to better. And if it was not because of UNHCR, I would not have survived from my childhood, and I would not have get this connection today. I'm very grateful to UNHCR. But down the line, I have to answer my brother before, while I'm doing this presentation. Marot asked before that we don't have hope, we don't know when are we going home. Let me tell you one thing. God has a plan for us. And He is teaching us a lesson because we have abandoned the way that we would have behaved. Why I said this? In the conflict that started when I'm still a young boy, in the first peace with the Khartoum, in 1972, when it was breached in 1975 of the left-out group, from 1975 when SPLM, SPLA were formed in 1983, it is 7 years down the line, and on the 8 years SPLM was signed, the first 7. In 1983, after 1991, when Riek Machar broke out from SPLM and people were fighting again, 7 years down the line, the 8th, Riek Machar broke out. In 1991, when he went to sign peace agreement in Khartoum, down the line 7 years. And from 1998 to 2005, comprehensive peace agreement, down the line 7 years. And from 2005 to 2013, when we broke out this conflict, down the line 7 years. And when we are looking for peace, it was signed in 2015, breached in 2016. Government would have been formed in November 12, but now added 100 days to make it another 7 years down the line. It's God's plan. No one believed, because my president said, when he addressed the Council of Ministers and the MPs, that I will not give extension, not even 1 second. But through the effort of President Museveni, when they came to Uganda, 3 months and 10 days were added. And many people of you maybe are misled why this would be beneficial to us. 2015 peace agreement that was breached in 2016 was because of the security arrangement and the issue of number of states. If some of you don't know. Because when you are mediating and two parties are there and one can be able to oppress the other, what do you expect? A small number of forces were taken from the opposition. They are still our brothers. The one in the government are still our brothers. But we as civilians are suffering. That's why we are always crying that we should be brought on board when they are making decision on our behalf. And we were neglected. So that small force was taken to Juba, and then the fighting again broke out. But why don't you equip the both sides to fear themselves that any violation they make will cause disasters to both sides, and then they will fear. Because it is said, if you want to maintain peace, prepare for war. If you want to maintain peace. And as I can end up here, I would again express my gratitude to the hospitality given to us by government of Uganda and its people, and they are still giving us until today. But my brother, next year will be a different year because it will complete the 7th cycle written in Numbers in the Bible when God said to Israel that I will chastise you 7 times. So the 7th cycle is completed next year and we will witness peace. And I'm optimistic. Thank you very much.
Please, let's put our hands together once again for Teknihal. And now we will move to the next moderated session. The session will be moderated by Her Excellency, the Ambassador of Uganda to Ethiopia, Permanent Representative to the African Union and Chairperson of the PRC Subcommittee on Refugees, Returnees, and IDPs. Please, let's put our hands together for the moderator. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
I'm sitting.
Okay.
There wouldn't have been a better way to begin this session than listening to the young person, the IDP, and former refugee from South Sudan. My sister, the Commissioner of Political Affairs, my sister, Minata Samata, that you traveled all the night to come to this meeting. I've known how you've been busy. I tried to ask your officer when you rested, and she said you've not. I want to thank you for your commitment, for always being on your toes, to make sure that the issues in Africa that affect us in this continent are handled. May I say thank you, and thank you for coming to Uganda. Your Excellency, the Minister from Egypt, I think he has gone out. We want to thank him for honoring us and coming for this meeting because they chair both the African Union, at the Union their president chairs, and then at the Permanent Representatives Committee, it is also Egypt chairing. So seeing him here, we are so grateful and we are honored, Your Excellency, for you coming. My colleagues, the ambassadors, I've not seen you walk out since you came. And you've all been here, you've been listening and making quality contribution to the discussions. All members of different member states who have been here, I want to thank the different embassies who have sent representatives. The representative of our own champion, the ambassador of Equatorial Guinea, he spoke at length. Yesterday also the ambassador of Equatorial Guinea spoke. Commissioner, your staff have all been here, starting from the Director, Political Affairs, and they have worked tirelessly. I just want to report that. Mr. Chanda, you've been part of us throughout. You've worked with us, especially through this theme, maybe it's important to mention that the UNHCR have worked with us through this theme of the year. And I want to say you've set a standard which is so high. I hope somebody will, another partner will take up from there, but we still want to link together with you. Our members from different organizations, from African Union, the REX, the honorable members of parliament from different countries, we want to say thank you. This morning, as we went through the discussions, we were privileged especially to listen to the youth. And I would like to say that the discussion was so heated up because the presentation which was made was detailed. It did not come from the blue. And therefore, I would like to say that all is not lost for those who did not have time to speak. I think we can still link up this. We now want to see how we look at the changing dimensions of forced displacement in Africa, challenges and prospects. And to handle this, we have two panelists. The first one is Dr. Chaloka Biani, the former UN rapporteur on the human rights for internally displaced. Put your hands together to welcome him. Rita Mukabo, I pronounce you in our language, Senior Political and Humanitarian Officer at the Department of Political Affairs. Please put your hands together to welcome Rita. Maybe especially I should report that Rita has been very active and they have all been working so hard. As they come, I want us to walk back 50 years to date that our heads of state and government sat at the OAU and made a decision on a convention on refugees. Can we picture what was there before? Did they have these dynamics? Did they think it will ever be like this? We were told that since the Kampala Convention, the number of the refugees and internally displaced persons have instead increased instead of decreasing. We've also been told that we've been looking at the conflicts as the drivers, but there are other areas that we didn't think would be that. Climate change is part of it. And you always remember that even if there's one word that the commissioner will miss, but she will not miss to talk of climate change. We were also reminded that there's a challenge to the young people, and they target our young people to be recruited and into terrorism. And we were looking at it and say, how does this happen now? There are other conflicts that have moved our people away. Some are economic, some are social, some are ethnic, and others are even religious. Yesterday, one of our delegates told us that even religiously, people can no longer live together. Rita, I want to begin with you. You've been working on this. You've handled. And I want to ask you that not only the status quo, but what do you see? What can you bring at this table to tell us and walk us through just by painting the picture that we have in the continent? You're welcome. Thank you. Your Excellency, Ambassador of Uganda and Chair of the PRC Subcommittee on Refugees, Your Excellencies, Commissioner for Political Affairs and ambassadors in the room, Honorable Minister, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to answer the question of Her Excellency the Ambassador. She has asked me to paint the picture of the humanitarian situation in Africa. I am going to walk us through on the situation in Africa. I have decided to use a PowerPoint presentation so that we can see the realities of what we are faced with on the continent. So I'll give us a little summary of the situation, the global situation. I will then come back home to the African situation. I will look at the causes of displacements, quickly, because we do not have much time. And then I'll touch on durable solutions as I conclude. I had told Excellencies yesterday in the meeting where they were looking at the Kampala Convention and the details of internally displacement in Africa, and I told them that we are weak on statistics. Africa is weak on statistics. At the African Union, we also do not have our own statistics. We rely on international partners and other development partners to get our statistics. So the statistics I'll be presenting to you are not our own as African Union. There are statistics that have been collected, analyzed, and presented. They're in the open space by the different partners, namely UNHCR, IOM, and DMC. And they are not, well, you may wish to contest them, but from what I know is that these institutions actually collect these statistics together with the governments where they are collecting them. But I really do not want us to waste so much time looking at details of each statistic and disputing or going around those statistics. The aim of this presentation is to present you the reality of what is happening. Let's have a general view, a general understanding of the situation in Africa. Now, globally, we have 70.8 million displaced persons. And out of this figure, 41.3 million are internally displaced persons. I am assuming, even if there was anybody who didn't know the details or the difference, since we were here 2 days ago, by now we know the difference between a refugee, an IDP, a migrant, a stateless person, and so forth. So I will not go into those details, but should you want an explanation, we are ready to provide you. So 41.3 million internally displaced persons globally, 25.9 million refugees, and out of that figure, 92,400 have been resettled outside Africa, and 3.5 million asylum seekers, and 3.9 million stateless persons. Now, out of these figures, and especially for refugees, because there are refugees are people who run from their country seeking asylum in another country. Now, 80% of refugees seek asylum in their neighboring countries, in the countries neighboring where they are or where they are coming from. Top refugee-producing countries globally, we have Syria, 6.7 million, Afghanistan, 2.7 million, South Sudan, 2.3 million, Myanmar, 1.1 million, Somalia, 900,000, Sudan, 725,000, and DRC, 720,000. Now, top refugee hosting countries globally: Turkey, 3.7 million, Pakistan, 1.4 million, Uganda, 1.2 million, Sudan, 1.1 million, and Germany, 1.1 million. The situation in Africa at the moment, and it has already been said to us, is 25.2 million displaced persons. A third of this forms the world displacement population. So the world displacement population, a third of that is from Africa. 17.8 million are internally displaced persons and 7.4 million are refugees. I just want to highlight what was said this morning, that Africa is a young continent with 60% of its people as the youth under 25 years. Compare that with the rest of the world. Look at the age bracket of under 25 years. You see Africa has a huge number, which is 60% under 25 years. And again, out of that huge figure, quite a chunk of it are in displacement. Going back to our statistics, 25.2 million is not a figure that can be ignored. It's not a figure that we can just brush aside and say it's not a big problem. It is a big challenge. And if I ask even many of you seated in this room, how many of you are from countries that have less than that figure, 25.2 million? I'm sure there'll be many countries in Africa that have less than 25 million total population, 25.2 million. So it is not a figure that we can ignore. Now, when you look at where they are placed globally, you will see the map of Africa has a largest number. The color in gold, or does it appear as orange? That is the displacement in relation to out of conflict. And the color in blue are displacements in relation to disasters. Look at our Africa, look at our continent. You will see the orange is a lot. We have the blue as well, but the orange is also a lot we cannot ignore. When we come again to Africa, I'm looking at the table and I'm highlighting countries, most refugee-producing countries in Africa, 2.4 million from South Sudan, and the figures continue: Somalia, Sudan, DRC, and Central African Republic. But I've juxtaposed that with the countries hosting most refugees. And Uganda is top on the list with 1.4 million. Again, these figures may have changed, they keep changing, and the special rapporteur will be telling us how these figures keep changing. But in average, you will see that Uganda is hosting a huge number of refugees. We also have Sudan with 1.2 million. We have Ethiopia is also doing very well, open to refugees, DRC and Kenya. Of course, I'm looking at the top 5. There are many other countries that are hosting refugees on the continent. I'm looking at those with the top 5 most refugee hosting countries. And you will understand that really Africa continues to be open and hospitable to their brothers and sisters when they run to them for refuge. Countries with most IDPs, IDPs again, internally displaced persons, so Cameroon and Cameroon. There is an interlink, but I will explain it as you go further, that you will see some countries are producing refugees, they are also hosting, and they are also affected by conflicts, at the same time affected by disasters. There is an interconnection. Now, when you look at the causes of conflict, of course, number one is causes of displacement. The first is conflict. And in Africa, we know the countries that are affected with conflict: Somalia, South Sudan, Libya, Central African Republic, DRC, and Western Sahara. But with the AU, that is Sahrawi Republic. Then there's also a generalized violence, and this is the situation of terrorism and affecting, causing displacements within certain regions. And the region most affected, Lake Chad Basin, which affects Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad, and Niger, as well as the Sahel region that affects Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. Just to look at the effects of such violence caused by terrorism, you can look at the map. I chose to showcase the case of the Sahel. And look, the orange again shows the extent of the area affected by these armed forces in the Sahel. Look at Mali, is seriously affected, almost really a huge chunk of the country. And imagine what kind of measures the government has to deal with. Look at the situation that the government has to deal with. Look at Niger, is also affected. Burkina Faso is not a small issue. So, and if you go on to the Lake Chad Basin, the situation is similar. If you are to look at the Horn of Africa, I just chose this because of time. But really, it is a serious situation on the continent. And going on, you look at the countries affected in the Sahel and the statistics. I don't want to go into the details, but you can see that the figures are not little. Now, displacements in the Lake Chad Basin also, you can see the figures there. They're not little either. It's a lot of population that is affected in Cameroon, in Chad, in Nigeria, in Central African Republic, and in Niger. So the situation in Africa is really something that cannot be ignored. We have to find solutions. Now, that was conflicts. Let's come to disasters. When you look at disasters, focusing on the Horn of Africa region, again, Ethiopia is affected, Eritrea, Somalia, Djibouti, and it extends even to Kenya, South Sudan, DRC, Uganda now. I'm not sure you're supposed to be having rain at this period. We have experienced the rain. In Kenya, there's even landslides, and many people are affected. So there's a lot of countries affected by climate change and natural disasters. At one point, you have droughts and famine in the region. At some point after that, then you have flooding, a lot of rain, and all this causes displacements. When you go to the Sahel, again, in fact, I was understanding that they have only 8 months of dry season, 8 out of 12 months of dry season. And the only rainy season is June, July, and August. And the amount of rain that is raining there is only 4 to 8 inches of rain, resulting in drought, famine, and desertification. And it's affecting northern Senegal, southern Mauritania, southern Mali, southern Niger, and Burkina Faso, Central African Republic, and the Sudan. So it is not something small, and it has its impact on the lives and livelihood of the people. And then add on to that the whole issue of conflicts within the same region. It exacerbates the situation in that region. Sahara, this is a region that we always forget, but it's also affected by disasters. There is very little rainfall annually, and powerful sandstorms affecting Algeria, Mali, Morocco, Sudan, Chad, Mauritania, and Egypt. And this is not easy for the people in this region. Somehow they have managed to handle, they have not resulted in displacements, especially across the borders. They have put in systems in place that can help them to deal with the situation. But basically, it is not an easy situation, and especially with the climate change, droughts are becoming an issue. And of course, with droughts come in the issues of food security and food pricing also going up, and all these things affect the people within the area. The Kalahari Desert is also, that's the southern part of Africa. Dry spells, drought, and famine affecting Botswana, Zambia, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Angola, and DRC. And at some point when the rains come, they are also too heavy, too much. We've seen the cyclones in Zimbabwe, in Mozambique, in Malawi. So you can see the impact of climate change on our continent and the impact on our people, which results to displacements. Now, the next one, it's a figure. I'm not sure you're able to read. It's too small for you. But that shows us the orange, it's a combination, it's showing you the combination of displacements of both climate and disaster affected as well as conflicts. And the sticks are actually each country. So you can see some countries are affected by only disasters, some countries are affected by both disasters and conflicts, and others only conflicts. It's just to show you the situation. And this is global, but if you have a chance, you can go deeper. If I myself cannot even see, I'll have to expand it. But yes, Africa is, most of the orange, the sticks with orange are in Africa. So what are the durable solutions? I'll just touch on those. And that triangle shows us. And I think to start off on that issue, I would like to quote the current Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, His Excellency Antonio Guterres. When he was the High Commissioner for Refugees, he said that the solutions to humanitarian are not humanitarian, they are political. So you cannot find solutions to humanitarian problem in humanitarian. We have to look outside humanitarian, and those solutions are political. But then the question remains, then what is political? And this is what I've attempted to look at. And the director also indicated this yesterday when he was closing the meeting. And he said that the solution lies in governance, because actually when you want to look at solutions, you look at the root causes. And the root causes is governance deficits. It is development deficits. It is peace and security deficits. When there's a deficit in any of those areas, or even a combination of those areas, we end up with a crisis, a humanitarian crisis. And that is where the situation is right now, especially when you look at conflicts. But you'll ask me, disasters is a will of God. What can you do about it? Yes, it might be beyond the planning. But however, the impact of disasters does not have to result in displacements. We need to put in strong institutions in place. We need to make sure that there are capable institutions in place to handle disasters, to handle effect of climate change, and to avoid impact of displacement, to avoid impact on our people and resulting in displacements. We also need to put in resources that are available in Africa. Africa is a rich continent. We also need to put in resources to make sure that we deal with disasters as they happen. We foresee we make plans to react immediately, quickly, rapid reaction, and to save lives. But at the same time, we need to put in strong and capable institutions that will ensure democracy, rule of law, human rights, respect for human rights, and good governance, so that we do not end up with conflicts in Africa, and at the same time ensure an environment of peace, security, and stability so that development can take place on the continent. I thank you, Excellencies. Thank you, Rita. Dr. Bayane, as a former Special Rapporteur on Human Rights of the internally displaced persons at the level of the UN, where you sat for 6 years, and I know you see from a different perspective. Looking at what Rita has said, the picture that she has painted, and what you saw as you sat at that table, I want you also to walk us through in the framework of what Rita said, starting from the causes to the different situations now we are in, and then what you think is a durable solution. But before you do that, I would like to congratulate you. Just yesterday, you was appointed by the Secretary General as a member of the experts group to the UN high-level panel on natural displacement, and also ask you that you are not there by chance. You've come to get our message so that as you get there, you see the situation we are in. Can you take it up from there? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Your Excellency Chairperson. Excellency Chairperson of the African Union Commission for Political Affairs, Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, friends and colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here. So first of all, may I extend my thanks to the African Union Commission for inviting me to be here, and also to UNHCR, as we have heard, for facilitating my attendance at this particular meeting. If I sound somewhat disjointed, I just arrived this morning, so I'm swelling from jet lag, and last week I was in Malaysia, so I haven't quite recovered from inter-regional jet lag, if I might call it that. Let me first of all start from the global perspective. As Special Rapporteur on the human rights of IDPs, I had opportunities to look into the situation of IDPs at a global level. In the Middle East, I went to Iraq and Syria when people said you can't go, it's too dangerous. But IDPs shouldn't be alone. In Latin America, I went to Honduras twice, Mexico, as well as El Salvador. In Asia, it was Sri Lanka, Afghanistan twice, the Philippines, and Africa, of course, took a great share of my attention. Visited Cote d'Ivoire twice, Nigeria, Sudan, South Sudan, the Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Burundi, Kenya, and Uganda for comparative reasons. So given all of this, in terms of the causes, I think what Rita said is quite accurate, that the major cause in relation to IDPs is the crisis of governance. And it comes through a variety of ways. Electoral systems that are malfunctioning, challenge to state authority by rebel groups, state collapse, and also state formation in some respects, where the processes are incomplete and being challenged all over the place. But to get back to the question that you first raised, what did the founding fathers actually have in mind? Let's not forget that as we are here, this is the 10th anniversary of the Kampala Convention, which was adopted here in Kampala. the African Union Convention governing the specific aspects of refugees had its first draft in 1964 here in Kampala. So starting with that convention, the vision was one of Pan-Africanism, extend solidarity to those who were fleeing wars of national liberation across the continent, and provide them with protection and refuge as a matter of solidarity. And to date, that convention is still a convention that is earmarked around solidarity and cooperation and offers us a framework for dealing with refugees concretely. However, that vision was also that after the wars of national liberation, the problem of refugees on the continent would be resolved. Today, we're still dealing with refugees. And that particular aspect then also informed the vision of the Kampala Convention itself. The Kampala Convention was drafted, and the vision behind it was that Africa should not remain imbalanced in terms of legal frameworks. There was a legal framework for refugees. There was not a legal framework for internally displaced persons. At that time, when the drafting started in 2005, there were about 12 million internally displaced persons in Africa. Now, as Rita has told us, the numbers are somewhere around 16 million. So the reasons for this is that some of the original caseloads of displacement, both internally displaced persons and refugees, have not been resolved. So we have layers on top of layers of individuals who are fleeing as refugees and who are also fleeing as internally displaced persons. Now, this creates a dynamic because displacement is not static. It's a dynamic, it changes along a continuum from displacement to protection, assistance, as well as durable solutions. But for Africa, at least the legal frameworks give us some prospects in terms of dealing with the challenges that we have. Africa is the only continent that has a legal framework on IDPs and also a legal framework on refugees, as it were, side by side. And both of these offer prospects. We speak of climate change at this point in time, but when the Kampala Convention was drafted, it was forward-looking, and it included aspects of climate change, to be dealt with. So in contradistinction to the Refugee Convention, the thinking behind the Kampala Convention was, what would displacement look like in Africa in 50 years' time, from about 2005, when the work started? The other side of the argument, of course, was that perhaps by 2050, there may not be IDPs in Africa. However, the experience of the OAU Convention governing the specific aspects of refugees told otherwise. This is the reason why the Kampala Convention is concise and compact and forward-looking as an instrument in relation to IDPs. So what then is changing? The protection of IDPs has always been based on preventing arbitrary displacement, responding to protection and assistance, and the same approach in relation to refugees. The entire framework of international refugee law, the 1951 Convention, the OAU Convention, are both frameworks of response based on humanitarian responses, the principles of humanity, as it were, in order to alleviate suffering, save lives, and given to all those in need without discrimination or without differentiation. This has gone on for a very long period of time. And in the early stages, it was fine. Early warning, early response, protection and assistance, early recovery, and then durable solutions. Somehow, this approach favored refugees to a large extent because of the presence of UNHCR and other actors. In the context of IDPs, we found that after the emergence phase was over and the humanitarian actors had withdrawn because their budgets had either run out or they have gone to the latest internal displacement show around the world, as fashions go, IDPs were in a worse-off situation. The tents that they had been given, without exception, I saw this in Kenya, I saw it also in Iraq, would have been torn. And in the Middle East where it's hot, the sun just came raining down in those tents. In Africa, when it rained, the rain came down into those tents. And each tent would be hosting about 8 to 9, 10 members of a family or 2 families. The conditions were often inhuman, degrading, so much so that most often the parents would say, we have no privacy at all in terms of marital relationships. The only moment that we can have privacy is to go out somewhere, to go to the bush, but by the time we come back, we find our neighbor has defiled our 8-year daughter. These stories were common in terms of the lack of protection, physical protection as it were. But what is now changing is to have an integrated approach to protection and assistance as well as durable solutions. So instead of thinking of phases A, B, C, early warning, protection and assistance, early engagement, as well as early recovery, reconstruction, the idea now is to integrate humanitarian and development actors from the very outset in order that resilience, sustainability, and investments are met in situations of displacement in a way that offers those that are displaced alternatives and choices. In the context of refugees, I'm sure you've heard over the past 2 days that you've been here, the Global Compact has emerged as the new approach, which is the development-based aspect. And in this region, Uganda is one of the pioneers of that. Ethiopia is also one of the pioneers based on the Common Refugee Response Framework, which essentially looks at the development needs of the hosting or receiving populations and to extend those needs to the refugees and perhaps to IDPs as well. Now, this has changed the flavor somewhat. We used to speak of displacement-affected communities, but now development actors have advised that we have to look at development-related needs in relation to receiving populations, which provides an incentive to states hosting refugees, because this is a development approach, and that when refugees may have gone back at some point, the projects still remain, the populations benefit, as it were. But for that to work, a mindset also has to change, which requires a more or less stable status on the part of refugees. The same approach now is being mooted in the context of internally displaced persons, so that by integrating development humanitarian actors, there's not a gap at some point. There's a continuum of protection and the presence of protection. And development actors have the capacity to remain in the long term with resources and to work closely with governments to address those particular issues. So this then leads to the discussion on durable solutions and how durable solutions can be brought about. Individuals, groups can be displaced within minutes, seconds, hours. But the whole process of restoring that can take years, months. The dynamics take over because the situation has changed. It has changed in such a way that the quintessential element of internal displacement, of course, is the coercive element that pushes individuals away from their homes or places of residence, habitual residence. And it follows that to achieve a proper durable solution in terms of return, people have to go back either to their homes or places of habitual residence. That may not happen at all times. And indeed, in most situations when I spoke to IDPs, IDPs were traumatized, and they looked at return as the least favorable durable solution. And yet, as the actors, were always pushing return, normality of conditions, And they would say, no, we don't want to go back. And some of the most obvious that I found were in Cote d'Ivoire, that were integrated with the local population. The local population had received them. And they say, this is our home now. We do not want to go back to places where there's danger and where there's war. When I came to Uganda, I was looking at comparative approaches. How did Uganda resolve its IDP issue? You know, in Africa, Angola and Mozambique that had wars for many years were also able to resolve internal displacement. But Uganda provided a model because it was amongst the first to have a policy on internally displaced persons. And I wanted to see how that policy came about, what it had done, and found that Uganda, in relation to that policy, actually used a development-based approach. Instead of giving you handouts, we are going to give you seeds. We are going to find a piece of land for you in places where you came from. If not, elsewhere, we'll give you hoes, we'll give you plows. And they said at first this was very hard for the IDPs because they were used to receiving handouts. But once they had the means to produce their own food and have their own dignity, to be independent, they saw the benefits of a development-related approach to displacement. And I think this is where the dynamic now is moving in relation to internal displacement. So the Special Rapporteurship obviously had close relationship with the African Union and also the African Union Special Rapporteur. But all this time, we do know that IDPs do not have a dedicated agent or agency. We know that globally the guiding principles are soft law, extrapolated from hard law. They are applicable, but they are nowhere near the African Union Convention on IDPs, so there's still a global challenge at that particular level. But the abiding challenge then globally, given the state of affairs, is to revisit the multi-agency approach that was devised in 2005, whereby IDPs are the responsibility of multi-agencies, the cluster system. And in my experience as Special Rapporteur, I found that IDPs fell between the cracks, that the multi-agent system was not operating. And I very much hope that as the high-level panel is going to look into internal displacement, it will revisit this particular aspect in order to have a dedicated, at least focal point for IDPs. The last points I'd like to make are that in terms of response and action, the new concepts are based on a whole of government approach in relation to refugees and in relation to IDPs. So that it's not just a ministry like Home Affairs or Internal Affairs, but it's the entire government apparatus. In the context of IDPs, we always spoke of this in terms of having a coordination mechanism where all government ministries are coordinated under a particular authoritative office in order that all the line ministries are engaged. Now this is being translated into a whole of government approach, and then durable solutions are being looked at into a whole of society approach, because the whole lot of society is actually involved. So their development humanitarian needs, in addition to those of refugees and IDPs, what the whole of society approach intends to look at. There's a lot more to say, but I suspect that there will be questions as well, and we'll be quite happy to take those. Thank you very much.
He puts on several hats. Amongst them, he was a consultant who drafted with the team the Kampala Convention. You can see how he understands it so well. I just wanted us now to look back and bring the solution, durable solution. I like the way he gave us hope by saying, actually, it's not only in Africa. But we should not rest because they say other continents are also suffering. Still, the picture given by Rita puts us on a red line. And therefore, even if others have the same challenge or challenges, Africa stands at a weaker point. He brings in some levels of how we can approach, and he said early warning. I think we've been talking about this for all these days, and early response, protection, assistance. He also says we should look at recovery, and he proposes that looks like why some internally displaced persons may not accept to go back is because they are not sure of what they get back home. I want to factor in the issue of maybe they fear that if it was because of conflict, that maybe some of those people still remain in the community. And therefore, we should also look at DDR and see if it makes it easier for them. It brings in the development approach of handling the challenges of refugees and internally displaced. And he proposes that it should not be a standalone, maybe just in a ministry, but we should have the ministries, departments, and agencies all coordinated and working together, all government approach. And now, I want to ask you, the participants, especially in the areas of durable solutions, because we've seen the picture, we've heard of what's taking place. Can we together try to bring in the durable solutions that we think can work, and we give the experts to answer back? You put up your flag or your hands if you're ready. Thank you. You're number one. I can't see you. I can't see your flag, but can we have the member states? Mauritius, Mauritania. I'm giving you, you will be number 3. Then you. Our chair, you'll come later. You'll wrap it up. And Cameroon? Okay, thank you, the first 4. But I'm giving you only like 2 minutes, mostly. They say I'm not a very good timekeeper, and you make me not a good timekeeper, but today I'm going to be serious. So can I start with Mauritius, my brother? Thank you. You can mention that I'm giving this to Rita or to Doctor, or I'm just proposing some solution. Thank you. Who is against my brother? Is it working? Yes, you've put it off again.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, the 2 presenters, for the very bright exposés. I'll try to stick 2 minutes. The 2 minutes in the form of 2 questions. What are the durable solutions? What if I propose to Dr. Leani, I imagine an Africa with countries that do not have dictatorships, that have democracy, that are multi-party systems, that have good independent electoral supervisory commissions, that have elections every 5 years. And from that good political governance, we should automatically have good economic and social development, which will be in line with your development-based approaches. So my question then, if we imagine that type of Africa, would we then in 20 years, 5 years time, still have 25 million IDPs and refugees? I do not think so. I would just like to get your feelings on it. Thank you.
Yes.
شكرا سيدة رئيسة. نعني أخذ الكلمة لأول مرة. أود
Do we have translation? Just a moment. Do we have translation?
There is.
وعظيم الامتنان إلى الحكومة الأوغندية وإلى السلطات وإلى الشعب الأوغندي بهذا الاستقبال الرائع والكرم الضيافة. فعلا هذا الموضوع موضوع مهم وهو يغرق قارتنا الإفريقية. كنت عندي بعض المداخلات ولكن السيدة ريتا تقدمت مشكورة بعقد رائع ومفصل واشكرها على ذلك. فعلا كان عقد شامل تضمن جميع الحيثيات التي كانت تدور في اذهاننا. فقط في مجال الحلول المستدامه، فعلا هذه الحلول التي قدمت هي فعلا توجهنا الى حلول مستدامه. لكن لا بد ان نتطرق الى معالجه قضيه اللاجئين، نظرا باننا فعلا في حاله افريقيا هناك الكثير من اللاجئين والكثير منهم يود الرجوع الى وطنه الى بلده. وهنا اعطيكم مثال في الحاله الموريتانيه. موريتانيا قبل سنوات كانت لديها بعض اللاجئين، يعني مثلا كان هنالك مواطنون موريتانيون لاجئون في الدول المجاوره، وموريتانيا قامت بإعادة وإدماج هؤلاء اللاجئين إلى وطنهم، وتم حل هذه المشكلة وقوي هذا الملف. ولكم أن تستفيدوا من الخبرة الموريتانية في هذا المجال. هناك فعلا كان أكثر من 1000 أو ما يزيد على ذلك من اللاجئين في إحدى الدول المجاورة، وقد تم إدماجهم في المجتمع الموريتاني بإعطائهم قضايا وإعطائهم قطاعات ومنازل، وهناك منهم من تم منحه بعض المواشي حسب رغبة كل منهم. وفعلا تم قيد هذا الملف بالشرط. هناك ندرة في الأمطار، وبالتالي هذه أصبحت ظاهرة تؤرق مجتمعات في دولنا، خاصة دول الساحل موريتانيا ومالي ونيجر إلى آخره. فإن هذه المسألة يجب أن يتم التطرق إليها، ويجب أن تتم أيضا معالجتها لأنها أصبحت مشكلة خطيرة جدا. ولا أريد أن أطيل عليكم. شكرا.
I have Cameroon before I come to Sahrawi Republic, and then our chair of the committee. Thank you.
Je vous remercie, Madame, pour les 2 minutes. Je crois qu'elles vont me suffire. Nous parlons des changements, mais les vrais changements, à mon sens, que l'Afrique a connu depuis un peu plus de 50 ans, c'est le changement de comportement. Nous avons tourné le dos à nos valeurs traditionnelles, à nos bonnes valeurs de solidarité, d'hospitalité et d'éthique sociale. Parce que c'est à cause du manque d'éthique sociale que nos élites font la mauvaise gouvernance. Et certains, donc, voulant garder le pouvoir pendant longtemps, d'autres qui le convoitent et ce qui crée des conflits et des guerres. Et tous ceux qui ne se retrouvent pas comme les jeunes, il n'y a pas de développement, souhaitent quitter l'Afrique. Et malheureusement, nous nous tournons vers les organisations spécialisées dans l'humanitaire pour demander de l'aide. Heureusement que face à toute cette situation, il y a d'autres pays comme l'Ouganda qui nous montre le bon exemple. Et c'est là où je vais arriver à la question. Je pense qu'une des solutions serait de rebaptiser la convention de Kampala le pacte de solidarité et de l'hospitalité africaine. Parce que par rapport à l'accueil des réfugiés, l'Ouganda est souvent présenté comme ayant une position progressive. Mais on devrait plutôt parler d'une position authentique ou du modèle africain de vivre ensemble. En effet, le modèle ougandais trouve son fondement dans les valeurs africaines de solidarité, d'hospitalité et de promotion de la convivialité. Il revient à d'autres pays de le reconnaître et de faire un pas, puis un autre pas et un autre pas vers la renaissance africaine. Il ne faut pas seulement ratifier la convention de Kampala, mais il nous faut renouer avec les valeurs africaines. Ces valeurs sont bien incarnées par l'Ouganda, qui nous rappelle le Bouganda. Oui, le Bouganda, eh bien, ce royaume africain qui a imprimé ses marques et transmis nos valeurs africaines au pays Ouganda. Ces valeurs sont vivantes ici à Kampala, la cité capitale qui nous accueille. Est-il besoin de rappeler que l'Ouganda a cédé à l'indépendance avec le Kabaka, le roi du Bouganda, comme premier chef d'État et autorité morale du pays? Alors, la convention de Kampala, disons-le, doit prendre la forme d'un pacte de solidarité, d'hospitalité, de convivialité, non pas seulement pour les États africains, mais aussi pour les peuples et les communautés du continent. Cette convention doit également s'ériger en un engagement à la promotion de l'équité sociale afin d'assurer une bonne gouvernance épargnante, la préservation d'une paix durable et un développement culturellement soutenable. C'est ici l'occasion pour moi de rendre hommage au nom du Conseil panafricain des autorités traditionnelles et coutumières qui représente, dont je parle au nom de plus de 9000 chefs traditionnels, dont je rends hommage à tous les rois de l'Ouganda, et je félicite le peuple hospitalier de l'Ouganda. Les Ougandais sont ces dignes Africains qui rappellent le chemin de l'hospitalité à nous tous. Nos remerciements vont donc à l'organisation qui a permis que nous puissions participer à cette rencontre. Et je finirai par souhaiter pouvoir faire des alliances au Kabaka avant de rentrer. Donc, la question c'est, ne faudrait-il pas plutôt parler du pacte de solidarité et d'hospitalité africaine, une valeur qui permettra de faire plaidoyer, qui sera acceptée par les Africains, les pays et les peuples, parce que l'Ouganda reflète et nous montre les valeurs africaines. C'est la tradition africaine qui est révélée en Afrique et nous félicitons, nous sommes là pour célébrer ces traditions, pour que vive le peuple hospitalier de l'Ouganda, vive l'Afrique et ses traditions.
Thank you. I think he speaks for the cultural institutions, not the member state. And the Kabaka, I know he will be very happy to know that actually we can recognize what they are doing. Thank you for walking us through the history. Can I have Sarawi? And I've seen again the flag of Cameroon as a member state now. Sarawi, go ahead.
Madam Chair, let me really commend the presenter, brilliant presentation made by the two. For one simple question, we have heard about the donor fatigue on the level of Africa beyond the global level to deal with refugees and maybe some returnees, maybe also states. What Africa can do to tackle these donor fatigue? It is 17 billion, really globally. How can we compete with the need in other parts of the world? Do we have the leverage? Do we have the influence? Do we have the connection? Do we have, strength really to attract the maximum, assistance? We know that there is a solidarity, African solidarity, and also generosity among Africans in general. The second point, which really I think is the heart of the matter, which being asked by His Excellency the Ambassador of Uganda, when she asked the audience, what do you think, the solution will be to this crisis, whether the consequences of deficiency of governance, or deficiency of peace, or deficiency of the development. I do believe that, the African Union, there are few issues which have not, these motions yesterday in our meeting in the CN, I think, consequently, the member state consequently meeting, raised something very important. So there is serious deficiency in the implementation of the decision. That is really a very important point. We raised clearly that there is a deficiency in the implementation of the decision of our organization. I do believe that, one of the steps which we need to take to, first of all, to map what is the problem, whether we have previous decision by the African Union or not. That means we need to revisit the decision related to the issue in discussion. If there is a decision of African Union, we have to implement it, we have to respect it, and we have to call for the actors and the people who are parties involved in that to respect that decision. That is, for me, one of the, at least, first step. I think, we have to be serious, courageous enough, politically, and to make everyone responsible for not compliance to the decision of our organization. Thank you very much for being so.
Thank you. Mr. Tek, I'll get back to you because there's something I want you to speak about, because you will speak for the IDPs themselves. That's why I wanted you first to listen to the member states, then you can come in. Cameroon?
Madame la Présidente, merci de me passer la parole. En fait, c'était juste un rectificatif pour dire que le compatriote qui a pris la parole tout à l'heure n'était pas représentant de l'État et ça a été rectifié. Donc, je crois qu'il a pu remonter.
Thank you so much. He later said it was for the cultural leaders. You realize that I said that too. Yeah. The commissioner, can you speak to that?
nommé par le secrétaire général. On a beaucoup d'Africains, au moins 3 ou 4 Africains là-dedans. Et vous dire, en tant qu'expert de cette question, vous pouvez compter sur notre collaboration parce qu'il y va de notre intérêt, puisque nous sommes le continent qui génère le plus de réfugiés. Je voulais peut-être profiter du micro pour lancer un appel à la société civile, les ONG, pour qu'on s'approprie la convention de Kampala. Il y a encore des gens des pays qui traînent le pas, qui n'ont pas encore ratifié cette convention en attendant la possibilité de changer ou en tout cas d'avoir un pacte sur le vivre ensemble. Il serait bon que les chefs traditionnels, la société civile, les ONG nous aident vraiment à renouer avec ces valeurs traditionnelles, de vivre ensemble. Malheureusement, il n'est pas le cas partout. Aujourd'hui, le Sahel est l'exemple où se vivre ensemble rencontre des difficultés. Voilà un peu le commentaire que je voulais faire en vous félicitant pour les brillants exposés que nous avons écoutés. Merci.
Thank you. Mr. Tek, can you now come up? Mr. Tek.
Yes. Thank you very much, Our Excellency Ambassador.
I think I mistook you. There's somebody behind there who has been on for a long time. Yes, you. Yes, yeah. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. My name is Wani Michael. I'm from South Sudan. First of all, it's heartbreaking for me to see the figures and to see my country on top of the list as the country with the highest number of refugees in the continent. Looking at the solutions, as you mentioned, I think as Africa, we need to have a very honest conversation on how we will have to move this continent forward. It's very disappointing to a young man like me from South Sudan to see our leaders, they hug fellow leaders from Africa, shoulders to shoulders. They go to Addis Ababa for African head of state summit. They come back to my country. We don't see anything durable. And the member state continue to celebrate them, continue to cherish them. They don't tell them the reality and the fact that need to be done. It is only you hear the Europeans coming in to say these leaders need to be held to account. I've never heard of African Union telling our leaders in South Sudan that you need to be accountable to your people and you need to end the conflict. We have never seen primitive measures coming in from the African Union and the other members of South Sudan to ensure that the highest number of refugees in South Sudan is addressed than people gathering for us to lobby for funds to ensure that these refugees are fed. What about these people going back to their homes to be able to go and cultivate and rebuild their life? So I think, for me, the way forward should be that it is time that the African Union and the African member states don't need to pamper these leaders. It's time that you honestly tell them that they need to walk the talk than us pampering them and cherishing them in the names of calling them names. So I really believe that it is time that we really walk the talk and tell these leaders it's time for us, for the conflict to really come to an end, so that the 2.5 or whatever million refugees we have really need to go back home. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to tell you that you may not know what takes place at the African Union, Department of Political Affairs, the Office of the Chair himself, and even the Peace and Security Council. It is not as easy. It is strong. So I don't want you to lose hope. That's why we've walked to this level. It wouldn't have been very easy. I want one refugee. Are you a refugee?
I'm a former refugee, but and my name is Cedric. Mine is not a solution or proposing solution. What I think is we all sitting in this room, we know the solutions when it comes to what it needs for IDPs or refugees. No one will say that doesn't really know what needs to be done. What I see is that we're trying to go around what needs to be done. And I'm just gonna give an example and a question of one of the durable solutions is integration to the second country, which is having refugees being integrated, but also giving them access to means so that they can be at the same level as the nationals. My question to you is, what are the actions that has been taken by the African Union and other stakeholders to making sure even the simplest actions that need to be taken for integrations are taking place? We're talking about meetings, seminars, and conference, but there are simple actions such as even access to employment. We are talking about access to employment, but we are not even giving or allowing refugees to have employment card. We are talking about access to movement, but we are not even allowing refugees to move from one place to another. At Addis Ababa 2 days ago, we had the African Summit on Refugee, but there are some countries denied refugees even a travel document to come to Addis Ababa. What can we do as to address, starting by those small issues before we get to the highest issues? We don't need to go things around. We know what's needed. Let's make them happen.
You have a lot of support. I'm now coming to Egypt. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Actually, we embarked on a
Forum on Refugees in Geneva, 16 and 18 December. There will be a global discussion on refugees, and the situation in Africa need to be presented and elaborated within the discussions that will take place. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Commissioner, you think you cannot hold it? You must say something, eh? Just in 1 minute, if you could.
Yes. Madam Moderator, I want to thank you, I want to thank the two presenters, and I want to join the rest of the other speakers to congratulate my brother for having attained such high responsibilities in the UN system. Two things, Madam. We have quite a number of regional groupings in Africa. We have the African community, we have ECOWAS, we have SADC, we have quite a number. IGAD, mentioned by the two. How I wish the issue of internationally forced migratory population and internally displaced people could be brought high on the agenda of these regional groupings to support the African Union in finding solutions which are African. So that by the end of the day, Madam Chair, there are complementary ways and means to come up with mitigation measures to the 70 plus refugees and IDPs in Africa. That's suggestion number one. Suggestion number two, Chair, is that I just want to re-echo the sentiment of my brother, I don't really remember who, but is it possible for this meeting to come up with what I would call immediate, short, medium, and long-term solutions so that we are able to know what can we handle first. First things first. And the experts at the African Union, as regional groupings, help to come up with a checklist of sheer things that we can handle immediately, short, medium, and long term.
Thank you, Commissioner. I just want to get back to the panelists and ask them to pick up what was said in a summary form. But Rita, I just want you to recognize that what you politely talked about, the statistics and data, has been picked up. You politely said we have no data of our own, and what we have is in open space, which means anyone can use, and maybe politely you didn't want to say use, can manipulate. We totally agree with the issues of the regional blocks. I think they will speak about that, especially Rita, to let you know how we are working with them now. Thank you, Rita. I'll begin with you.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, Your Excellency. And Your Excellencies, thank you very much. I think most of what came from the floor are comments rather than questions, and we welcome all the comments. The Secretariat is busy taking note. Some of those were even recommendations, so they'll form as part of the outcome of the high-level dialogue. I'll just comment on two things, and one is the issue of statistics, data. It is true, the Honorable Minister has said it. We do not have statistics that we can call our own as Africans, the African Union, and many of our member states. And it is something that the Excellencies also worked on yesterday. Sorry, I think translation is not... Are we okay now with translation? Is it okay now? Interpretation, and is it okay now?
Is it okay? It's fine now? Can I proceed? Okay. Yeah, so Africa needs to build our own capacity to handle our own challenges. And one of that area is in the area of statistics. We need to find ways to build our own centers of statistics. Excellency, I think you're having a problem. En français, s'il vous plaît. Ça ne marche pas.
So you speak in French. What's the problem? I wish we had an African language so that we could all go without this and we speak to ourselves. You can see the complication now. And all these interpreted languages are not even ours, except Arabic. Thank you. What do we do? Can we? Leaving no one behind. The Africa we want. Can someone speak to us to let us know what the problem is? Can you try? Try to speak.
Yes.
It's okay now? Okay, great. Thank you very much. Yes, you were talking about building African capacity to handle our own challenges, especially in the area of statistics, and this can only be done through political will, putting in resources available, and building strong and capable institutions that are responsive to our needs. When it comes to the issue of durable solution, I cannot fail but quote one refugee last week when we were having the humanitarian symposium in Nairobi, and she said, "You're talking too many things. The only durable solution I want is peace. I want to go back home." This was all the way she wrapped it up, and that is the way I would also like to echo that feeling of that specific refugee. Peace. We need peace so that people can go back home. But this requires really transformative and visionary leadership, as well as political will and resources to put in capable institutions. Thank you. Thank you, Rita. Doctor?
Thank you very much, ambassadors, distinguished delegates. I think quite a number of questions and comments were made, and I'll try and respond to as most of them as possible. When I was Special Rapporteur before the Human Rights Council, you had to almost do everything that has been thrown at you, although I do know that we're short of time. But beginning with the distinguished delegate from Mauritius, thank you very much for the question. What are the durable solutions? And indeed, we take it for granted that we all know what the durable solutions are. Both in terms of refugees as well as internally displaced persons, the durable solutions are return to places of origin, local integration, or resettlement elsewhere. But these mean different things for refugees and for IDPs. For refugees, return is return from the country of refuge, and often it involves international movement, a tripartite agreement, voluntary repatriation, and arrangements that are made. Sometimes refugees go back to their country of origin, but they actually don't go back to their places of origin. So there are still some issues to unpack there. For IDPs, although the terminology is the same, we find the durable solutions First, in the guiding principles, Articles 28 and 29, it's the primary responsibility of the government to find durable solutions. The Kampala Convention addresses durable solutions in Article 12 and adds compensation and reparation in certain circumstances. But all of these require durable solutions in safety and dignity. And they also require the participation of IDPs. I think the point that has been made by the minister from Egypt here is very strong. Without the participation of IDPs, durable solutions are difficult, to achieve, because the IDPs are the persons who are involved. They always know and understand their situation of displacement very, very well. So we speak of return, obviously, when IDPs have gone back to their homes or places of habitual residence. Local integration, when they live with the receiving or host population within the country, or settlement elsewhere to another part of the country for certain reasons, i.e. they can't go back to where they came from, they cannot integrate with the receiving population, and therefore other means have to be found to resettle them elsewhere. Now, all of these are earmarked on the basis that a durable solution is found when an IDP has no protection and assistance needs that are linked to their displacement. They just become like any other person. And this is the sense in which the African Union Convention uses the term reinsertion. When they've been reinserted either in the places of origin or local integration or elsewhere. It was meant to be an all-encompassing aspect. So durable solutions are complex, but they're also achievable. IDPs find durable solutions on their own. There are transitional solutions, cash transfers, improving the well-being of IDPs, housing, for example, accommodation, and the like. So we have to think in a more holistic way in terms of medium to long-term, transitional, and of course, then the durable solutions themselves. The question on democracy, governance, well, of course I do agree. But at the same time, we also have to be aware that democracy can be fragmenting. It's a disruptive process. You go to elections, it's adversarial, you're at each other's throats from different parties. After the elections, you have to get together. Sometimes those dynamics continue, to operate and cause fragmentation, completely. And IDPs would be, the victims in that particular aspect. But to look at what are the governance problems in a particular situation, I think is actually, the key, because they vary from Africa to Eastern and Central Europe, where I was. There it's territorial issues, statehood, and the like, and to try and find which durable solutions would apply. Mauritania, I think the main issue is desertification, which is important here. And I think desertification and persons moving away as a result of that in the context of displacement has to be seen as a measure of adaptation to climate change. And therefore, these persons need protection, they need measures, they need to be received properly where they are. And I would actually say that the biggest challenge for Africa next in elaborating frameworks is to elaborate a framework on climate change and the movement of persons. I think this is quite critical. There is nothing to protect people affected by climate change who move across borders, as the distinguished delegate said. They are not refugees in the classic African Union, that they should lay the Kampala Convention before the General Assembly of the UN and open it up for signature. But I think they were given wrong advice that that could not happen. I think it is possible, because you have to recall that the United Nations Convention relating to the status of refugees applied to Europe, even if it was a United Nations Convention. So there are some ways in which at least Africa can say this is our contribution to the world in terms of ethics, values, solidarity, and frameworks too. Donor fatigue, yes, but largely because our approach, this has been raised by the distinguished delegate from the Sahrawi Democratic Republic, because the approach has been humanitarian all the time. Raise money, humanitarian needs, buy food, but the development approach is slightly different because it aims at building resilience, sustainability, and also investment in those areas. But also, as we saw, the Kampala Convention envisages that there should be a fund that states should, at national level, establish in relation to IDPs. Now, this is a question of priority. In some places like Azerbaijan, where I went to, every 10% of the sales of oil is put into an IDP fund. So every country can look at what is its most productive activity and get a certain percentage of that and contribute that into an IDP fund. The South Sudan draft legislation on IDPs is also formulated on that particular basis. But also, without disrespect to our countries and our leaders, when they actually put their mind to something, they can do it. This Munyonyo was a village before the Commonwealth Conference was held. And you can replicate that over and over, that when our countries want to build these mega projects, they actually do them. But in the context of IDPs, these are people who are marginalized, they are vulnerable. But what we should realize is that statehood is based on a stable or permanent population. It's one of the elements. And if a population is unstable, it also follows that the state will be unstable, whether in the short term or in the long term. And this is a premium value in terms of investing to try and stabilize populations that are displaced, because eventually that goes the stabilization of the state itself. Solutions around the efficiency of government peace, I think this relates very much again to what was raised before. In fact, the African Union, since its inception from the OAU,